And our opening words this morning are by George Kimmick Beach. Everything begins on the verge of awareness. The dawn is not, and then is. Sleep is, and then is not. In between is the awakening. The passage of thin light between breaks open the day. The passage of thin sound between flows into the day. Too soon the numbing rumble of traffic swells, the day glares. Let the soft haze hang again across the row of morning. Wait upon the narrow moment, the first awareness of being in between. Live days and seasons on the thin edge of dawn, in praise that every single thing begins now. Spirit of life, creative force of energy that breathes within and around us, be present to us this morning. Walk with us in our uncertainty. Sit with us in our discomfort. Sing with us in our joy. Accompany us in our awakening. We gather this morning from our many lives, sitting together as one community of seekers. And each of us brings with us our different needs for comfort, silence, forgiveness, celebration, music, connection, the slow building of trust, the painful work of letting go, the hopeful growth of budding spirit. May we settle into this time of holy inquiry. May we open ourselves to this time of sending and receiving messages from deep within our hearts. May we breathe deeply into our neediness. May we come to terms with our strength. May we pause here on this verge of awareness and awakening. Spirit of life, we open ourselves to you and to whatever comes next, to whatever comes now. Amen. And now for another Women's History moment. Tom and I have been sorting through the books in the library, and one of them that we found was by Sophia Lyon-Fahs, a Unitarian who completely revolutionized the concept of children's religious education. She's a fascinating woman. Sophia lived for over 100 years, and it's just incredible to think of the changes that she must have seen during her lifetime from 1876 to 1978. Think about that stretch of time and how much changed. Sophia was born in China on August 2nd, 1876, the child of Presbyterian missionaries. She graduated from Worcester College in Ohio, and upon graduation signed a pledge card reading, "It is my purpose in life, if God permit, to become a foreign missionary." In 1901, Sophia took a part-time job as a YWCA secretary at the University of Chicago. She planned to take courses there, feeling the need for some further education to prepare herself adequately for the mission field. Sophia had been warned of its radical intellectual atmosphere, but she was sure of her own faith and confidently began her studies in Chicago. But Sophia couldn't help but be influenced by those radicals. President of the university at the time was William Rainey Harper. champion of the higher criticism of the Bible, a study that takes into consideration the historic context within which the books of the Bible were written. Also teaching at the university was John Dewey, one of the fathers of the progressive education movement. In June 1902, Sophia married fellow student Charles Harvey Foz. Because of his health problems, the young couple never did go into the mission field, but moved instead to New York City, where Charles accepted a position with the National Board of Missions of the Methodist Church. Sophia continued her studies now at Columbia University's Teacher College, another intellectually exciting place. In addition to the influence of the higher criticism of the Bible and the humanistic concepts of progressive education, Sophia Foz was influenced enormously by her own children. Between 1905 and 1914, Sophia and Charles had 5 children. And as she herself wrote later, the children who joined our family circle were not merely the object of my educational efforts. They were the most potent source of my own education. In a vital sense, the children were unwittingly my major teachers. As she raised her children, Sophia continued with her education and teaching. She lectured at religious education conferences and taught Sunday school classes in the experimental Sunday school run by Teachers College. As she hammered out her own increasingly liberal theology and its implications for religious education, she found herself drawing less exclusively on the Judeo-Christian tradition and more on the natural sciences, on the religion of primitive people, and on other world religions. Her own ideas had become radical. Not only did she suggest delaying children's exposure to the Bible until they were ready for history in general, but she was even suggesting that children not be introduced to other people's idea of God until they had had an opportunity to begin to develop their own. Sophia believed that the building blocks of religion are a sense of wonder and a questioning mind. Thwarted by the unreadiness of most ministers to embrace her ideas, and feeling the need for a systematic study of theology herself, in 1923 she enrolled as a Bachelor of Divinity student at Union Theological Seminary. She also became a lecturer in religious education on the seminary faculty. Word of her innovative ideas and practices in the school at Union soon brought her in direct conflict with the Union seminary authorities. One group that seemed more ready to embrace her ideas was the Unitarians. After all, in 1837, 100 years before she took up her work with the denomination, the prophetic Unitarian preacher William Ellery Channing urged his listeners to have faith in the child and to see as the challenge not to stamp our minds irresistibly on the young, but to stir up their own. Not to tell them that God is good, but to help them to see and feel God's love. In 1937, Sophia accepted the position of editor of children's materials for the American Unitarian Association, eventually redoing all of their religious education materials and publishing the New Beacon series, which emphasized nature, world religions, and a liberal interpretation of Judeo-Christian history. Her books had titles like How Miracles Abound, From Long Ago and Many Lands, Beginnings of Earth and Sky, and Jesus, the Carpenter's Son. To help the children of Unitarian families understand some of the churches their friends might attend, Foz wrote the curriculum, The Church Across the Street. With every book, a teacher or parent guide was provided with ideas for artistic and dramatic activities, and also bibliographies of resource materials. And Sophia herself never stopped learning. In February 1959, at the age of 82, Sophia Foz accepted the invitation of the Unitarian Church in Bethesda, Maryland, to be ordained into the Unitarian ministry. She delivered her ordination sermon herself. Sophia Lyon Foz died on April 14th, 1978, at the age of 101. And we still study her ideas in divinity school. And our reading this morning is by Edwin Lin. I took a class at Harvard Divinity School with Reverend Ed Lin. And he's a retired colleague of mine who was ministers for many years at the North Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Danvers, Massachusetts. I liked my classes with Ed because although the topic of our course was officially Unitarian Universalist polity and practice, his was the class I remember most as really focusing on the practice part. Ed had been a minister forever, and we could ask him anything. So we soaked in his knowledge of the practice of parish ministry. And like us here, Ed takes great joy in living by the ocean. Over the years, he often included stories about the ocean in his sermons. His retirement project was to compile these writings and put them together in a book which he titled Shorelines, Life Lessons from the Sea. It is from this book that I take this morning's reading, called Barnacles and Other Grabbers. I've abbreviated it some. It begins with a quote by Ethel Starbird. "Looking at barnacles, from my point of view," Bobby Wayne Pruitt Jr. said, "you can't see much to recommend them." I had to agree. Twice a year, Bobby, a commercial crab fisherman of Tangier Island, Virginia, crouches for a week beneath the beached boat, chipping at its barnacle-encrusted hull. He can ill afford to spend this time ashore. And the reading goes on with Ed's words. "Barnacles remind me of just how stuck we can get. These obstinate marine animals adhere their tough-shelled adult stage to any sea object, whether stationary rocks and piers or mobile boats and whales. Barnacles can be as small as 1/8 of an inch or as large as 6 inches. Following the larval stage, the acorn barnacle, one of 2 types and the one we know best, attaches itself to a selected object and then secretes a hard white cover, which begins small and eventually builds up to a hard protective shell. Our attitudes and behaviors can build up like that. They can begin in an imperceptible way, then over a period of time become a tenacious, sometimes inflexible reality. For us, however, there is no easily identifiable white shell to warn others of our rigidity and adherence to these attitudes. We can get as rigid as the captain of a battleship who saw what looked like the lights of another ship heading toward him, as told by Frank Koch. 2 battleships assigned to the training squadron had been at sea on maneuvers in heavy weather for several days. Shortly after dark, the lookout on the wing of the bridge of one ship reported, "Light bearing on the starboard bow." He then ordered his signalman to contact the other ship with the message, "We are on a collision course. Advise you change course 20 degrees. Back came a signal, "Advisable for you to change course 20 degrees. The captain said, "Send, I am a captain. Change course 20 degrees. "I am a seaman second class," came the reply. "You had better change course 20 degrees. By that time, the captain was furious. He spat out, "Send, I am a battleship. Change course 20 degrees. Back came the flashing light. "I am a lighthouse." And the battleship changed course. Ed ends his reading by saying, "Barnacles are tenacious. They can withstand the pounding tides of a hurricane without budging. They can ride a whale at high speed above or below water and never loosen. Though such stubbornness works for barnacles, it won't for us. Behaviors hold us, and we them, in mutual adhesion. We can get free, but we need to take the time to get out of the water of compulsion and clean our hulls of fixed attitudes, to argue fairly, solve problems, and allow some quirkiness in others. Unlike the barnacle, we are capable of loosening our protective shells, freeing our grip, and letting go. I love that old story about a new bride preparing her first roast for dinner. She preheats the oven, and before she puts the roast into the pan, she slices off both ends. As she's sliding the pan into the oven, her husband sees her and asks, "Honey, why did you cut off the ends of the roast? That's the best part." The young woman thinks about it for a minute and says, "I don't know, that's how you do it. My mother always does it that way." The husband shakes his head. But sure enough, the next time they are over his mother-in-law's house, she is making a roast, and he watches her cut off both ends before putting it into the oven. "Why do you cut off both ends of the roast?" he asks her, hoping to get a clearer answer from mother than from daughter. The mother thinks about it for a minute and says, "My mother always did it this way." The next thing you know, it's Thanksgiving, and the whole extended family is sitting around the table. The young husband sees his chance to get to the bottom of this family secret recipe. "Grandma," he says, he's part of the family after all now, "I hear that the secret to making a great roast is to cut off both ends before cooking." "Don't be silly," said the old woman. "The ends are the best part. And it's a real shame because my roasting pan was too small and I always had to cut it off the ends to make it fit." I wonder how many of the things that we do during the course of our day are because that's how we've always done it. Today we're talking about habit, those ways of doing things that have not only attached themselves to us, but which have also calcified and hardened, sticking to our underbellies like barnacles. Barnacles that we never take the time to scrub off because we can ill afford to take the time out of the water. So today, let's drag ourselves onto the shore, flip our boats over, and take a look at those barnacles of habit we've been collecting, because they are slowing us down, getting us stuck in old ways, even if we hardly see them there. I'll admit, I am being a little bit hard on habit today. I mean, if we really and truly had to think through every little thing as if it were brand new each time, it would take us forever just to get through breakfast. We need habits in our lives. And there are benign habits and even good habits. We floss. We fill out the scheduling request forms outside April's office when we need space for a meeting. And I'm glad that many of you are in the habit of coming to church. Although I do hope that on some Sundays at least, you are coming because it continues to be meaningful to you and not just because that's what you've always done. But no, I am talking about those habits that get us stuck or keep us from seeing things in new ways, keep us from practicing new ways of being. Being stuck in old habits is not only spiritually stagnating, it's bad for our creativity, for our relationships, and it's bad for our brains. Neuroscientist Dr. Rudy Tanzi and alternative medicine practitioner Deepak Chopra tackle this subject in their book, Superbrain, Unleashing the Explosive Power of Your Mind to Maximize Health, Happiness, and Spiritual Well-Being. The title really makes you want to get that book, doesn't it? Dr. Tanzi says, your brain is constantly adapting, so it's rewriting itself. The chemistry is changing. The genetics are changing every moment in response to the world around you and in response to your own mind. The brain needs to constantly adapt to new stimuli. Introducing it to new information as well as habits can strengthen it as you get older. Dr. Tanzi clarified that the brain strives from new material, not just rehashing the same material or tendencies. Anything new, you're making new synapses and connections. When you learn something new, you strengthen what you already know, and the more synapses you have, the better off you are as you age. Now, the key to keeping your brain firing, to building new synapses, is not crossword puzzles, as so many people seem to prescribe, although those are good at giving the old brain a workout. No, to stay in control of your brain, the book suggests 5 strategies which include self-reflection, self-awareness, and conscious choice-making. Conscious choice-making, opposite of habit. I had the honor of attending the Writer's Voice Cafe this week in celebration of Hildy Olson's 90th birthday. The way you've all been talking about Hildy, I thought that this woman had been here forever. And because she's published 2 books of poetry and spends her days teaching poetry to others, I assumed that she had been writing forever. But it turns out that Hildy moved here and began writing poetry in her 80s. And what really moved me about Hildy's story that she shared was that to embrace that spirit and talent within her, she had to get out of the habit of thinking she couldn't do anything right. A habit that had rooted itself in her when she was just a little girl. Self-reflection, self-awareness. If you have heard or read Hildy's work, you know that her poetry is full of this. And it has opened up her life in ways she had never dreamed. But maybe lifting up Hildy's amazing story is using too big of an example. Let me tell you about another conversation I had this week with the meditation group on Monday night. We were talking about mindfulness. Well, that's mostly what we talk about, mindfulness. But sometimes it's hard to connect what you're doing on the cushion to what you're doing in other areas of your life. But this week we really got on a roll. When I quit smoking, said one meditator, it was really hard to break the habit. But there were all kind of tricks that helped. And those tricks were really all about mindfulness. For one thing, she stopped keeping her cigarettes in the same drawer where she had always kept them. This one small change, putting her pack of cigarettes in a new and different place, interrupted the habit, caused her to stop and think for a second before pulling out a new cigarette. It didn't keep her from smoking, but it interrupted the habit enough that each cigarette was now a mindful choice and not a mindless one. What other habits can we interrupt, dismantle, scrape off? There are the physical things, smoking, snacking, shopping for things we don't need, mindless consumerism. And there are the emotional things, thinking we aren't good enough, judging others, making assumptions, closing ourselves off from love. Some of these are habits we have built up over a lifetime. Shedding them seems daunting, if not impossible. But it starts with noticing. It starts with mindfulness, self-reflection, conscious choice-making. It starts with changing the drawer where our cigarettes are kept and being brave enough to take pen to paper to record our thoughts. And you know, individual people are not the only ones who fall into ruts worn deep through habit. Institutions also do this. Churches do this. Talk about that's how it's always been done. Churches are built on this principle. But the difference between ritual and tradition and habit is mindfulness. If you are consciously choosing to repeat an act because there is meaning in it for you, that is ritual. If you are keeping something alive because it says something about who you are as a community that matches what you want to be saying about who you are as a community, that is tradition. If you are doing something because that's how it's always been done, or because you've done it so many times that way that you don't have to think about it any longer, that's habit. And just like on the personal level, a lot of church habits are pretty benign. But let me tell you something I heard a few weeks ago at a gathering of church leaders in our district. Reverend Peter Morales, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, was visiting the Ballou-Channing district. That's the name of our district here. It encompasses Cape Cod and southern Massachusetts and northern Rhode Island. And he told us about an interesting survey that was done recently of UU church folks. A large sampling of UUs were asked a series of questions about their church life and culture. And although they were anonymous, each church was given a code number so answers could be connected to what church they were from. And when the results came in, the researchers were able to analyze the data in some interesting ways. When asked to pick a statement that most reflects the feeling they have about their church's identity, The study showed that members of declining churches, churches that are shrinking rather than growing, were most likely to choose, "My congregation feels like a close-knit family." Now, this caused great debate, as I'm sure you can imagine. A close-knit family, isn't that a good thing? Some asked. Don't you want to feel like part of a family when you go to church? But from another corner, have you ever tried to join a close-knit family? How true. Although being born into a close-knit family can be warm and cozy and comforting, breaking into a close-knit group of any kind can be miserable. And all those things done by habit make it worse. I remember doing my ministerial internship and trying to decipher church life as an outsider. One week I asked someone where to put the offering plates after service. "Put them where they always go," was the answer. That's just it," I said. "I'm new here, and I don't know where they always go." Some of you might have noticed how explicit I try to be about directional details during the service. That's a hospitality thing. I don't just invite people to recite our affirmation, although I know that many of us know it by heart and might even be saying it out of habit without thinking about the meaning of the words anymore. But I invite people to join with us in saying our affirmation, which is printed in the order of service. That way, visitors can find it. And I grew up in a traditional New England church, so I am quite accustomed to waiting until 3/4 of the way through the organist's introduction to the hymn before standing just in time to come in on the first verse. But I mess all of that up here, and I invite folks to stand right at the beginning, because I have a bird's eye view up here of the confusion on people's faces when they start to stand when the organ begins to play, and then others remain seated, and then they figure, okay, we sit for hymns here. And then a minute later, everyone's standing, and they are scrambling to catch up. I love tradition, but I also want to be welcoming and not exclusive. And I also want us to be open to trying new things, to seeing things in new ways, to shedding old habits that are not helping us to live out our vision and mission. I want there to be room in our old ways for newcomers to come in and feel they have a place. I want to be able to talk about how we do things here with curiosity and fresh eyes. I want us to do things out of intention, not habit. And I want to challenge ourselves in our own lives and in our church community to be mindful of what we are doing, why we are doing it, and what message it is sending. Oh, you know what members of thriving and growing congregations were most likely to say about their church? "My congregation is a beacon of justice in the community." Ed says, "Behaviors hold us, and we them, in mutual adhesion. We can get free, but we need to take the time to get out of the water of compulsion and clean our hulls of fixed attitudes. Unlike the barnacle, we are capable of loosening our protective shell, freeing our grip, and letting go. Let's be a beacon, not a barnacle. Let's be a beacon, not a battleship. Let's be a beacon. Amen, and blessed be.